My God. There's no one here. The old tavern, the church, people were using them for shelter, but they're gone. Mutations we expected. But there's something else. A disease. I was attacked by... Well, it used to be a person. But it had these green, glowing lesions, and its voice. Angry, tortured. We are one. One what? Whatever happened here is beyond anything we expected. And we expected a lot.
The beautiful landscape of Appalachia had every reason to survive. For one, barely any bombs landed here, but second, the Great Forest was rich for hunting. Survivors would have had an easy time finding sustenance and help. The first group of people to rise to the occasion were the Responders, a collection of volunteers made out of firefighters, police, and medical staff, willing and able to help anyone who needed it. They had set up stations to teach people how to obtain clean water and how to hunt. The one problem the Responders had was the Brotherhood of Steel, a collection of military personnel left over from the war who kept on requisitioning supplies from the group, sometimes through threats. The argument was that the Brotherhood needed the food, ammo, and medicine because they were fighting newfound monsters in the east, namely enormous flying mutated bats. Now the Responders didn't believe them, of course, thinking it was just an excuse for them to take what they wanted, until of course the Brotherhood got overrun and the bats made it to the Responders. The bats would infect humans and animals with some form of disease, a plague that would zombify its host and turn them against their own friends. Living creatures that come into contact with one of the mutated bats will sometimes begin to mutate. The victim's skin turns dark, almost black with the smell of ash. Some kind of biochemical process takes hold at this point. Lesions that burn with intense heat begin to form on the victim's body. The affected creature appears to be covered in smoldering embers. In the case of humans, higher mental function eventually disappears, replaced by extreme, almost animalistic aggression. Because of this process, they call the creatures that are transformed in this way the Scorched, and the bats were then called the Scorched Beasts. When a Scorched reaches the end of its lifetime, the growth of the plague inside of them completely overcomes them, rooting them in place and petrifying their body. The Brotherhood had figured out where these Scorched Beasts were coming from, and they had a plan to stop them, but they were wiped out before they could. The Responders had prepared a cure for the plague, but they were also wiped out before they could complete it. Both groups mistrusted one another, and because of their paranoia, they both ended up dead instead of banding together against a common foe. Suffice to say that the raider and bandit groups from the region were also completely destroyed by the Scorched Plague until, by the time Vault 76 opened up, nobody was alive in Appalachia. The beginning of the Scorched Plague actually comes from beneath the ground, where it is believed that a collection of fungi exist which created the first mutations. Not much is known about this fungi, other than it is very much possible that researchers in Arctus Pharma tinkered with the fungus inside of their floral lab before the war.
Test log 3-12-78-A14. Eyes appear glassy. Subject seems to be experiencing decreased blood pressure and heart rate. While this new solution appears to trigger a vasovagal response in subjects with a complementary DNA structure, no other reversal. It's no good. I don't know how much of the mutations we've seen are from radiation and what is from the compound we've been working on. I don't understand how Samson got clearance for aerosol testing before we even completed lab trials. Did we cause this skin disease? Or is it just a mutation? And what of those whose minds have degraded? Great. The breakers just went out. This winter's taking a toll on the lab. I guess I better get to fixing it before the plants freeze.
Now, there are fungi that exist in the real world that have mind control properties. Fungi that can and do control the minds of insects in order to force them into certain peculiar behavior. Behavior that makes it easier for the fungi to spread. The current belief is that the radioactive fallout that seeped into the earth must have mutated similar fungi deep underground, and that this fungi infected the pygmy bats that lived there. This turned the bats into the Scorched Beasts, who then would go out into the world in order to further infect animals and humans. This being, of course, the fungi's natural way of reproducing. The fungi controls the Scorched with a hive mind mentality, albeit a very primitive one. The Scorched get to retain a small portion of their intelligence, which allows them to instinctively wield weapons they were proficient in before their collapse, as well as use the terrain to their advantage, as in the use of cover, for example. It is also seen that the human Scorched retain some level of their living personality, as one can see some of the Scorched perform events they used to do in life, now in undeath. The biggest question when dealing with the Scorched, however, is the question of the small little crystals that grow on their skin. That being, what are these for? Scientists in Watoga discovered that the crystals are indeed ultracite, a mineral ore that gives off energy and radiation, newly discovered in the region. They were actually doing research on how to use it for conventional energy purposes, even going so far as to predict that ultracite was going to take over as the new main source of energy for the United States. In any case, this ore appears to grow from the skin of the Scorched, and the ore can be found plentifully in regions where the Scorched Beasts tend to nest. Some hypothesize that the crystals are part of the fungi, or at least a byproduct of the growth of the fungi. They believe that the crystals literally grow from the bodies of the Scorched, and that the reason you can find so many ultracite veins in Scorched Beasts' nests is because they happen to grow thanks to the fungi's influence. Others believe that it is the ultracite that gives the fungi its power, or at least the ability to live. They believe that the Scorched nest close to ultracite veins because they need it. They need it as a human needs to breathe, or as a living being requires nutrients. The theory being that the Scorched jam crystals of ultracite into their bodies so that they can exist far away from their nest. That without these crystals, the Scorched would simply become petrified and cease to live. That the petrification happens when the crystals of ultracite in their bodies get depleted of energy. What's interesting is that depleted ultracite, when used as a weapon, is extremely effective at hurting the Scorched, as in depleted ultracite is somehow dangerous to the Scorched, which lends some credence to the theory. Ultracite is good for them, depleted ultracite is bad for them. Another theory is that the crystals are needed for the fungi to be able to mind control the Scorched. The crystals emit a very specific range of radiation that can be used as a sensor. Survivors of Appalachia managed to find a way to predict the movements of the Scorched thanks to the radiation signals of the crystals, but that wouldn't be too far off from allowing the Scorched Beasts or the fungi from sensing or even controlling the Scorched as long as the Scorched had the crystals. The nature of ultracite is the true mystery behind these monsters, and whether or not they can be truly defeated. The responders discovered that only 3 entities were seemingly immune to the plague: the mole rats, the wolves, and the ghouls. And thanks to this information, they managed to get close to creating a vaccine that the main character finishes as they go through the main story. The Brotherhood of Steel, on the other hand, discovered the main nest of the Scorched Beasts, what is known as Fisher-Site Prime. They discovered that the creatures reproduce at an alarming rate, that simply fighting them as they come would never win them the war. So they decided themselves to attack the main nest, hoping to create a big enough explosion to force the queen out of the nest and defeat her overground. They found the location of the biggest nest in the area, but failed at completing the quest and perished. The main objective of Fallout 76 is to use the knowledge of the responders in order to vaccinate yourself from the plague, to use the knowledge of the Overseer in order to find the nuclear silos, and then use the knowledge of the Brotherhood of Steel for the location of the Prime Nest. By unleashing a nuclear explosion at Fisher-Site Prime, you will shake the foundations of the nest, forcing the Scorched Beast Queen to come out, and only by defeating the Queen and slowing down the reproductive cycle of the Scorched Beasts would Appalachia be finally free from the plague.